Vince Gilligan's Pluribus is a thought-provoking show, the kind that makes you think,
what the is happening?
We hear you, Carol. Here are some of the things we can't stop pondering in between episodes. Gilligan has long been a master of creating convincing fictional worlds that are populated by convincing people. And even with a show like Pluribus, where most of the people are hive mind weirdos, it still feels just about as real as an imaginary world can get. But even someone as talented as Gilligan is going to end up with a few extra nuts and bolts after he pieces everything together. That being said, we started wondering to ourselves a couple of episodes in, where are all the pets? And no, the wolves in episode 5 don't count. According to Forbes, 66% of people in America own pets. 65.1 million households have at least one dog, while 46.5 million have at least one cat. That's a lot of furry friends that have seemingly just vanished into thin air in the Pluribus universe. Of course, from a writer's standpoint, we know exactly why there aren't any dogs and cats running around. They just wouldn't work as background flavor in this scenario. Like, at all. Anyone who owns a pet knows that they would not be having any of this hive mind shenanigans whatsoever. It's actually really sad to think about, all those lonely pets not knowing what else to do besides wander off into the countryside and leave the sweet life of domestication behind for good. Sorry for that devastating image.
What is wrong with you?
Chill out, Carol. It's not like you had any pets before all this went down. And you know what? That would actually kind of explain why pets wouldn't have sought her out after their owners went through their transformations. A person who doesn't like animals is probably no different than a hive mind weirdo in their eyes. Speaking of the hive mind weirdos, we've been wondering off and on since we found out in episode 2 that Kumbo has been getting it on with a potentially staggering amount of them. What is it like to hook up with one of them? We know they love to make immune people happy, so perhaps it isn't too hard to imagine. The more important question then is, what is sex like between two of them? As in one hive mind weirdo doing it with another hive mind weirdo. Do they actually do it the old-fashioned way? Meet up for drinks, have some dinner, watch some Netflix, and then stare at each other blissfully under the sheets as they do the deed? Yeah, probably not. Everyone is just everyone now, though. A singular mind. Do they all experience these potential hookups as one? At this point in the show, we know there's at least some sort of separation between emotional and physical sensations in the hive mind. While they all seem to feel emotions as one, as evidenced by their worldwide freakouts whenever Carol loses her temper, they don't quite experience pain as one. Case in point, when Zosha goes into cardiac arrest, she's the only one who actually seems to physically feel it. All the others just stand by and watch as she falls out of her wheelchair and crumples to the ground. So at least it's a little less weird when you think about it that way. Furthermore though, how do they decide who pairs up with who? Personality, lifestyle, age difference, all the usual things we consider when we look for a partner no longer matter. So we'd have to assume that the hive mind would pair people up in the most logical, science-based way possible. As some fans have already pointed out, they would probably make these calls based on genetic predispositions and work to produce the most healthy offspring possible. It would be a completely emotionless affair. In fact, it's possible they would even omit the actual process altogether and just do it artificial insemination style, like they're breeding million-dollar horses. Oh man, here comes Carol again.
You bunch of ghouls!
Anyway, moving on. All this talk about reproduction leads us to another related question. How does childhood work in the Pluribus universe? We learn in the second episode that kids are no longer kids. They're part of the hive mind just like anyone else. This revelation comes courtesy of Carol asking a child to answer a question that only a gynecologist would know the answer.
What kind of speculum do you prefer? Metal or plastic? What?
It would depend. Both have their uses.
No.
So, what is it like to be an assimilated kid? Do they still need to be cared for in any of the ways that a normal child would? They obviously need help lifting certain things and can't drive a car until they're big enough to see over the dashboard. But what about the emotional stuff? Are they confused and emotional during puberty? What's it like to grow up in a world where it's no longer necessary to disobey authority and skin your knees and learn valuable life lessons through an endless series of mistakes? Would you even call it growing up at this point? It's even crazier to think about what it's like to experience the hive mind as a newborn. Assuming they're born assimilated, are infant brains even capable of comprehending the hive mind's thoughts? Can they talk right from the get-go? Are they all basically Stewie when they emerge from the womb?
You know, Brian, that acting stuff was a bit much for me, but I did quite enjoy the dancing and the cocaine.
Yeah?
Yep,
So you're just gonna be a dancer and a drug addict?
for a while.
Another thing we can't help but ponder while we watch the show is, what role does art play in the Pluribus universe? It's definitely hard to imagine the hive mind making time for artistic expression. Though they're all still technically human, they all know what the other is thinking instantaneously since they're essentially a single mind now. As such, there isn't really a need to express the inexpressible, which is basically the entire point of art in the first place. More likely than not, the hive mind would find this to be a waste of their time. I'd much rather just keep focusing on making the world a better place in more practical ways, like centralizing food supplies or working to conserve energy. But for the sake of argument, let's assume they still make time for artistic endeavors. If so, we would have to wonder, is literally everyone capable of dishing out masterpieces now? Great books, great paintings, great movies? Would literally anyone be able to offer up incredible performances like Toni Collette or Bryan Cranston or Daniel Day-Lewis?
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up!
You have to admit, it would be fun to see someone other than Emma Stone play the main character in the next Yorgos Lanthimos movie. Not that she isn't great, but come on, man. Really though, everything would more likely come out looking like AI slop. Cheap, crowdsourced renditions of the great things that can only truly be realized by rare, singular minds that only appear a few times with each new generation. So maybe they should just stick to socializing healthcare and maintaining roads and all that. The next one is a weird question, but it's still fun to think about. What do the hive mind weirdos dream about? Assuming they sleep, that is. We don't see how they could get away with staying awake all hours of the day. Like we've said before, they're still just like any other mammal, at least in a physical sense. Think of how bonkers our dreams can be normally, as single-brained entities. On any totally normal night after a totally uneventful day, we'll close our eyes one minute and end up searching for talking otters in Transylvania with our high school math teacher the next. Even the most dull of us, the blandest nobodies that ever walked the earth, have nocturnal adventures that would make even the late great David Lynch wriggle in his seat. So how absolutely off the wall must the hive mind's dreams be? The product of every living mind on the planet working together to produce an infinitely complex subconscious soup. And we know they still experience emotions, albeit as one. So does that mean they're still susceptible to night terrors like normal people? Or sleep paralysis? Also, how does dreaming work if they're not all asleep at the same time? Time zones are still a thing, so what happens when a portion of the hive mind is having a nightmare in Australia while the other portions in America are awake? Can the conscious peeps at least sense their unconscious counterparts' distress, if not experience it right alongside them? Who knows? Maybe Gilligan will explore this possibility in future episodes. Does the hive mind experience what could fairly be described as immortality? We've known since Carol's first interactions with Zosha that the hive mind is able to absorb and access the memories of the dead, at least those of the people who have been assimilated. Remember what she told Carol about Helen in episode 2?
She joined us before she passed. She's gone, but all of her thoughts, her memories, they're right here.
So does this mean that Helen, in some ways, lives on despite being buried in Carol's backyard? We already floated the idea of Carol someday asking Zosha to essentially become Helen for her when she can't deal with her loneliness anymore, which we do think is a possibility. But would this count as immortality? As much as we think about plugging a consciousness into a computer as immortality, if Zosha were to maintain her Helen persona while she's in the presence of Carol anyway, would Helen continue to grow as a person? If not, we'll think of it more as a form of preservation rather than immortality. If so, well, that's a whole can of worms that we should definitely save to discuss some other time. Okay, this last thing is a little out there, literally, but stay with us. Since Pluribus began, debates have been raging about whether or not actual aliens are going to eventually play a part in things. Some believe it's inevitable, others believe Gilligan wouldn't dream of veering off in such a campy direction. At this point in the show, it's impossible to say one way or another. One thing that can't be argued with, however, is the fact that the signal scientists discover in the opening sequence of the show comes from outer space, 600 light-years away specifically. So whether it's an actual alien race or something else that defies description, it's extraterrestrial in nature no matter which way you look at it. The dude who explains everything to Carol even says that humanity is the beneficiary of extraterrestrial technology. And remember that he also makes a subtle but important distinction.
There are no aliens. None on this planet.
Not on this planet, he says, which means that the possibility of aliens existing elsewhere in the Pluribus universe is still a thing. That being said, let's just imagine, for the sake of argument, that the signal was beamed to Earth by an alien intelligence. And let's say that this alien intelligence is also a singular hive mind, sort of like the Borg in Star Trek. Would the hive mind on Earth then be able to mesh with this alien entity and communicate with it in the same way members of the hive mind communicate with each other on Earth? We don't see why not. We've already seen how one hive member can communicate with another on the opposite side of the globe instantaneously. The limits of time and space don't seem to matter in this instance, so it should be possible for this psychic connection to stretch across light years just as easily as it stretches across miles on Earth, right? If so, a more interesting question arises. Could the hive mind on Earth already be communicating with this alien intelligence and just hasn't told Carol yet because she hasn't thought to ask? Definitely something to ponder as the show goes on.